Laura, you are Director of Sustainability for a company that is as large as Touristik. So it's one of the biggest companies in Europe, and I can imagine it's hardly possible to count all the stakeholders that you have. It must be more than 1,000 also external partners and suppliers just on the first tier. So I was wondering, how is it possible to manage stakeholders in the first place?
Yes, thank you. So I hope my voice holds. You can hear also I'm a bit struggling with my health today, and I will try really hard not to sneeze into the microphone, but thanks for the question, Katharina. So in my point of view, it's very important to go topic by topic and then to decide who are your important stakeholders. So there's really no one size fits all approach. And I really would recommend like different approaches and different steps regarding to the topic. For example, if we write a new guideline, then of course we will involve experts like AOs, but specifically for this topic, right? And then if you know your risk of your activities in your supply chain, for example, then you should get involved exactly there. For example, if now with the German supply chain law, we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, or also before the law started in Germany beginning of this year, we were already doing like human rights impact assessments, for example, in Thailand or Myanmar, even before COVID. And there the aim, of course, then is to involve local partners, authorities, politicians, and so on and so on. And then lastly, I would say sharing is caring. So get involved and be involved in working groups, be involved in roundtables like the roundtable we have here for human rights. And then you can also get the knowledge from different stakeholder groups, but also, of course, from experts. And that will help you a lot, I would say. But I think the main point is really have an individual approach and really look at the stakeholders for a specific topic and then dive deeper into this topic.
Can you maybe in 2 or 3 sentences explain a little bit more in detail how this approach looks like for Touristik?
Yeah, for example, if we take, for example, the child safeguarding guideline, which we published beginning of this year. So first, of course, you write a guideline. Yeah, but this is the really first step where you then involve experts. As I said, when you talk to NGOs, see that you get the right content into your guideline. But this is a guideline. It's on paper and it's written, but that's about it. Then you have to implement this guideline internally and externally. So there, I would say internally, it's really important then to inform your employees to for trainings so that really also the guideline gets alive. And then externally, you have to communicate these guidelines. There are also different approaches. For example, of course, you have then different product requirements. In our guideline, we wrote down that we don't want to have any school visits or visits to orphanages anymore. And then internally, you have to inform your product colleagues. But then, of course, also you have to have the statement externally published. And then also there to participate in roundtables, working groups, and so on. Sorry. And then if you want to really bring a guideline into life, we mentioned in our guideline, for example, that homestays are still allowed, but that we, for example, have specific requirements for homestays. Then, of course, you also have to offer trainings for the homestays there. And then when we come to the child safeguarding, we're in the working group of the German Travel Association, but also work with different partners there. And there we decided then to have a destination workshop next year on Mallorca, the spring of next year, to then in a location where child safeguarding also a topic get involved there. So really coming from a high level of writing a guideline and involving experts to really bring a guideline into life and have an on-site destination workshop. I think this is really important to have this different layers from see who's involved on a bigger scale and then become very specific in the end to see where you can really then have an impact.
Yeah, something that is definitely necessary, especially if we're talking about such a large company. Maybe let's switch the perspective a little bit and go to a very small tour operator. So SASANE has a very unique approach to stakeholder management and engagement, and especially female empowerment, because the main goal of this tour operator is to train human traffic survivors as tour and training guides in Nepal. And with us, we have Jeny, who is founder of SASANE. They are also the newest member of the Roundtable. And Jeny, we just heard Laura's perspective with many different levels within a company, and their Touristik is offering, I think if I remember correctly, almost 180 countries in total. So that's a very big number of countries. And for you, you are originally from Nepal, you were born and raised there. So I can imagine you have a lot of contacts there on a personal level, but also on a business level. And I was wondering, for your very particular form of stakeholder engagement, how important or how much of an advantage is it for you to have all these connections already on site?
Thank you for your question, Kathrin, and thank you so much for the opportunity. Yes, it's an advantage because Nepal is a small country, and you have to be aware about the issues and what areas, like tourism is not just a commercial industry, especially in a country like Nepal. So you can actually contribute to something there. So understanding the issues and
it's fine, they can hear you.
What did I was saying? Is it on?
No, it doesn't look like it.
Oh.
There. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Being a small country and with a lot of issues, a patriarchal-driven country, it is very essential and a great advantage to actually understand like where the loopholes actually stand and who is a fit stakeholder to actually work on that particular loophole. So for me personally, I am I studied social work. And for me, like empathizing human trafficking survivors, female human trafficking survivors who are below 30 years of age, who got trafficked at the age of 11, is a great advantage that I can empathize to them. I can hear their stories and actually try to find out like what is it that they want from us, and which area I need to work on, and how I can make tourism an advantage for them. How we can use the big tourism industry to actually contribute on transforming their lives. So it has been an advantage, of course, to be with them, to hear their stories, what terrible past they had to go through, what they are looking for because they don't have support from anyone. Yeah, if I answered the question correctly.
Yeah, definitely you did. And I particularly liked when you just said, what is it that they want from us? Because I think it's a question that we don't ask enough when we're dealing with stakeholders and when we're dealing with local communities. This is one of the main questions. To switch the perspective and to not to say how can I maximize the profit of my company, how can I maximize the benefits for my clients, but what do the local communities want from me, and how can I make tourism for them truly a force for good? And when we talk about local stakeholders, one group that particularly comes to my mind are workers. Especially when we talk about human rights and tourism, workers is one of the first group that often comes to our mind. We know that tourism is a difficult industry with regard to workers' rights. We have a lot of seasonal contracts, a lot of overtime, a lot of very difficult contracting. And that's one of the reasons why we have Kathrin here, who is working for IG Metall and is a trade unionist. So she doesn't have a particular tourism background, but I think it's even more interesting, therefore, to bring her on stage and to see the role of that stakeholder engagement plays in advocating for workers' rights and how you actually navigate those conflicts that might occur when you try to reach stakeholder, or when you're trying to engage stakeholder while advocating for workers' rights. How does that work?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you guys for having me. And what I already learned today is that the tourism industry is a very female industry. That's good. Mostly the audience that I talk to looks a little bit different, but we are on our way. So just to put that. Okay, I think my job as a trade unionist is pretty easy because my stakeholder is the worker. And I think really underlining that human rights are workers' rights and workers' rights are human rights, and that it goes together. That is the one thing that I always try to promote, because sometimes we pretend as if the worker is someone else than the human, or we kind of neglect the issues that workers have besides the one that humans have. I think where we actually see that a lot is when it comes to the implementation of the supply chain law. In my industries, representing mostly automotive industries, for example, steel industry, we often hear them say, oh, we don't have child labor. So, you know, the law is not going to change anything for us because that's not something that we see at our plants in other countries. But what if we look at other workers' rights, like the right of association? That is something where in the industries I, represent, that I work with, that is a really, really dominant topic. And that is something also where I would see a link, because naturally you could ask yourself, why is someone from IG Metall sitting here? Like, I'm only a tourist, but I'm not working in tourist industry. But I think looking at the brochures that are lying around here, the topics are the same. We're talking about collective bargaining agreement, we're talking about wages, we're talking about living wages. What is a living wage? I don't know. But we demand this, but how do we get there? And that only works by engaging the workers and not representing them, telling them what their issues or questions should be. And that's exactly what you raised. It's about asking them what do they want, but also at the same time making sure to empower them to help themselves. And I think that's, two sides. That can be complicated, but I think that's where we have to start, and that's because we've been hearing about Kenya before. They have 7,000 members in the metal industry and in the union. So I think that's kind of relatable, but that also shows one factor. Like, one thing we must not do is pretend that we're working at eye level, because we don't. We have way other resources than my sisters and brothers in Kenya. And we can be open about it. I didn't organize those 2.2 million members. It's not my earning. It's because we're an industrialized country and Kenya is not yet. So that's why they have less members. They have less workers in the automotive industry. But it's it's not pretending that we're meeting at eye level. It's pointing out the differences and the chances and opportunities we have, and make sure that they can be part of it still. So I think that is something where we do come down to that ground level where I'm trying to work on, and the way we do it most basically is by networking. And that sounds as if it wasn't worth saying that, but I think networking is the number one thing to do. And a law is a law, and rights are rights, but networking with people, real networking, knowing them, building trust, which takes a lot of time, especially in an international context. You raised it. When I go to Kenya, when I go to South Africa, people see me as the white manager, because the only time they see white people is when the German managers are coming to check on them. So building that trust, networking, and then finding out what are the issues and how can we tackle them, how can we use the German co-determination system to maybe support, that's the number one thing. And that's where we invest a lot of capacity to do networking with our partners.
Thank you. I would like to ask you if you want to ask questions. Just a quick reminder, we also had some questions already, or people raising hands here. Just use Slido for the moment.
I would just like to ask you to use the microphone as well.
I should, yeah, of course.
That Slido would be a little bit strict. But...
People agree. That's true. Maybe I can use the other one as well, so we have two, so we don't have to give it around in the. Can turn on this one as well. Yeah, thank you for raising all of these points. I think it's something that we oversee way too often. You already said it. It's difficult to have a conversation on a level, and still this is exactly what we have to reach. In tourism, it's exactly the same. Look at our industry. We have a maximum of around 10% of the world's population who is able to travel in the first place. But here and discussing these issues, we are the ones who are already privileged enough to have been on a plane and to be able to work around these discussions, and that actually increases our responsibility drastically. So just keep that in mind. Regarding the networking, I think that's the main reason why the Roundtable also exists. We are that platform for networking and for building trust, for a non-competitive dialogue between different stakeholders. So use this force, also use the Roundtable as a network to raise problems that you have, raise issues that you have, and see where the connections lie. That's just a quick statement. I'm looking to Laura to see if we have already questions in the audience, and maybe I'll give you the microphone.
Yes, we've got some questions from the audience. I have one question for Laura. Touristik works with a lot of service providers in many different countries. How do you implement the guideline within all those stakeholders, like DMCs and hotels? That's one question.
Okay, I understood like 90% of it, but I think it was about we have a lot of service providers and how do we implement our guidelines there, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So for that Touristik, actually, what is pretty good when it comes to implementing our guidelines, most of the DMCs are our own DMCs. So these are basically our own colleagues in the DMCs. We have our own DMC network. So this, of course, helps us a lot to implement our guidelines there in our own business. And then another advantage is that the DMCs then are in the locations and they know their stakeholders in the locations. So of course, also they help us then to be our longer arm than in the destinations. Of course, we have parts which go into contracts. I think for a bigger company, this is quite normal, but you can't stop there, right? This is just paper then again. So also there we are thinking about, if it comes to the supply chain law, then we talk about trainings, of course, internal trainings, but then also for our partners in the destinations, so that it's not just paper we send out, so but also to involve people then and to explain what we do, because I think this is really important. The supply chain law is quite complex, and I think not everyone yet has understood it in Germany. So how can we then imagine that like partners who haven't heard about it at all understood it? So there it's going to be really, really important to explain it, and also to explain why we need certain data, then certain measures, because the law requires us to do that and asks us to do that. So this is going to be the way. So communication, trainings, and then of course you also need something on paper. But for me, this is not the most important part.
Thank you. Yeah, we all want to have, I don't actually know if that's the same term in English. In German, we say paper tiger. We don't want that. That's also why our symposium today is called Meaningful and Effective, because we think it's an absolutely asset that the things that we talk about also this afternoon in our workshop are not just a high level discussion, but are really, really hands-on. Jana, is there one question more from the audience that we bring in at this moment?
Yes. So I try to talk louder because the online audience is listening from this microphone and not from this one. There's one more question what can I do to enhance human rights at a destination when staying? How much stakeholder engagement would be appropriate, and where would I cross a border?
Okay, so I take the microphone back, maybe. If I understood that question right, it's you don't want to interfere with somebody's personal space, and you don't want to be patronizing. I think I hope that's the main aspect of this question. And this is a little bit also goes into the same direction as the white savior principle that we just talked about. It is definitely a small border to check whether you already patronizing and whether you already trying to enhance a concept on somebody who actually doesn't want that. We have this conversation on human rights in general all the time. The big dilemma of whether it's a Western concept or not. I would say that extends the frame of our discussion today. But Jeny, maybe I can forward this question to you. You work with marginalized groups and with extremely vulnerable groups as well. So if you see them also in the connection with the local stakeholders like the government, how do you manage that? How do you try not to be patronizing towards, for example, the police or the local government, and telling them what you actually want and expect from them, but at the same time achieving what you want and what you expect?
For this, we have like a good example is whenever we plan any initiative or design travel itineraries or any project, we make sure that we do assessment study. Like we create certain questions, we do the study, and we have like reports. Like our itinerary is not just going to Annapurna base camp, for example, in Nepal and just looking at the mountains and coming back, but we also make sure that which communities we are reaching, what kind of people we are reaching, and is it contributing to the reduction of too much migration that is happening in Nepal for foreign employment, like reducing rates of human trafficking or girls' dropout rates in school, because that is massive in Nepal. And each small problem that happens in Nepal, for example, the recent earthquake that did take place in the far western area, it always leads to certain issues like girls dropping out of schools without any reason, too much discrimination between a girl child and a boy child, missing girls. Like there were a few girls running around in the playground, and on the very next day, there's no one. They are just like they are missing. So we make sure that we reach to each and every particular issues like this. Like we try to find out the education system there. Like is it welcoming for the girls, for the young girls? Is the family like how is the relation of a mother between her girl child and her boy child? So we take travelers there. We have tourism initiatives there. So from that we also trace impact, like how is the tourism initiative contributing to these issues. So we have a proof. We take that to our government stakeholders, because if we don't have that, they don't listen to us. And if I go and stand in front of a government official, it's like she's a girl. So it will be better if a male person or someone who has a gray hair come and say all this to me, then I would listen to it seriously. But she's a girl, looks this young, she is in her teens, so I don't want to listen to this. This is not an issue for me. So if you go with a report and if you show them proof, like see, this is actually a problem. Because we work with survivors, we have survivors with us who say that this is an issue and you need to do something. And how our initiative is creating such change, if we go to them with the proof, then they are sensitized to some extent. But it takes a lot of time in Nepal. Nothing happens quickly. You have to be patient. You have to force them to do something. You have to take commitments from them. You have to show their own commitment to them constantly, like every 3 months, every 1 month. Reach out to them by email, go to their office, force them to do something, then only change happens. And showing example has been like a good thing for us, because as we work with survivors, we have examples to show like how a life of a survivor has been transformed with the tourism initiative that SASANE is doing. So they have to accept it.
Yeah, I think that's one point that was not mentioned in the question, but which is extremely important. You don't only have to deal with the problem of you probably patronizing somebody as soon as you bring in these issues, but at the same time, in many countries, we are still facing the issue that you will be patronized in that second where you bring up an issue, especially as a woman. And sometimes it might be necessary to swallow that bitter pill, in the sense of saying, okay, for the greater good, even though it underlines or it deconstructs my personal values, I bring in somebody else, even though I don't want that, but just for the purpose of the project. Kathrin, I don't know if you have similar experiences working in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. Were you facing also similar challenges or opportunities when you were engaging stakeholders in this region? Did you do that personally? And how was your experience there?
Yes, exactly. Yes, myself, I'm in charge of that region, Sub-Saharan Africa, but it's only one of the regions that IG Metall does work in. So basically in Sub-Saharan Africa, we work with South Africa, which is where the automotive industry is pretty strong, but we also engage with workers and worker representatives in Kenya, Ghana, the DRC, Namibia. So also countries that I guess where you work with. So I think one challenge that we always see, that brings me back to what I said earlier, is capacity. I mean, as I said, I'm a full-time trade unionist. IG Metall pays me for sitting here, for doing what I do. And they pay me for going there and working with the worker reps. But for them, they have to manage the whole workforce with maybe 4 or 5 worker representatives or trade union officials. So how do we make sure we don't overwhelm them? How do we make sure that we have some kind of consistency among our partners? Because earlier I said networking is key, but networking also only works if there's some kind of consistency among the people that you network with. Otherwise, you go there each and every time and start from scratch. And then one more challenge that we face is that we go there, we spend some time there, but then we go back and then we're gone. And I mean, nowadays, or in the pandemic, people on this side of the world were saying, oh, it's great to have Zoom, it's great to have Teams, we can all meet online anytime. Well, that's not true for the Global South, actually. People hardly have access to a laptop. They mostly use their phone. They have, I mean, everybody who works at all with South Africa in this room knows that electricity is really a problem in South Africa. So they might be the most developed partner we have, but if they have load shedding 12 hours a day, then there's no way for me to do networking with them via Zoom. That's like a very global North perspective on networking. So that is another challenge that we have. So we also make sure that we have partners, which is also an important stakeholder for us, like the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, as our sister federation here, because they have local offices in almost every country and they are there 24/7. So we engage them into our projects so they can make sure that there's some kind of sustainability, they can follow up, we make sure they're being accepted also by the trade unionists, because obviously they're not trade unionists, they work for federation, for a foundation. But still, I think that is, you know, one of the challenges that we see, that we try to find workarounds for, because we want to make sure that it's not this kind of, just like German global north perspective that we put on them, telling them, yeah, let's meet online next week, and then bring them into a weird situation that needs trust again for them to tell us, well, sorry, but we don't have data. If I use the data for this meeting now, then I cannot call any Uber for the rest of the month. It takes a lot to also be that honest as a partner towards you, because as we said earlier, this eye level thing, right? So I think it has to be really a low level kind of thing. You don't need any fancy materials, you don't need any fancy devices, you just need the trust, the consistency, and the network.
Thank you for also bringing us a little bit down to earth with the statement. Also with our event today, what we often do is we have just really high level discussions which are necessary in order to come up with a suitable strategy. So I would never say it's pointless what we're doing here, but it is even more important to have that practical approach that you just mentioned, and not just building scenarios, but also asking very simple questions. Do the people that I want to engage with have any possibility to engage with me? Might it be language or technology or whatever? And I maybe bring in Laura here once more. Do you at Der Touristik have a strategic approach to that in order to talk to people who might not be on the first tier? And that is extremely difficult, don't get me wrong, but as a big company, I would be interested in seeing if you already found a way how to engage with people that are not working on the first tier.
Yeah, this is what I mentioned, I think, was the first question with the impact assessments. We did numerous times already, right? Of course, not during COVID, but I think it is important then to be actually there and talk at the location with the numerous stakeholders you have there. So we have that already for human rights impact assessments. We will do that for child safeguarding, as I mentioned already, next year then on Mallorca. And of course, also in other topics, we are discussing that right now with their dialogue, if we should do that actually also for climate change, because also there it's I think really important to understand what these changes are actually causing for the people in the destinations, and you can only, I think, discuss that if you're there in person in one room and discuss that from different perspectives. So if you come from this high level, what we discussed before, where you just have to see what are the topics, what are the right stakeholders, who do you have to engage, and then go further than your first tier, go to the second tier, I think then you really have to go there and talk to people. I think this is the way to go. And of course, if we set up trainings, for example, we do now with you for the supply chain law, then it's always important through questionnaires and the right questions to involve the people from the very beginning, and not just to put out trainings and then see, I don't really know if they can use the technology if we put out the right questions and contents. So if you have a bigger topic there, I think it's important to engage the people from the beginning. But I think for a real conversation and a real picture, you have to do it in real time.
Yeah, this is also discussing on site is what we're also doing with the people who are in the room today. That was one of the reasons why we wanted to have the possibility to do the symposium today on site with the workshop in the afternoon, because we think it is quite important to sit together. We're incredibly happy for our online participants as well, but some things can only be done if you're sitting next to each other and just maybe having a coffee and having also the chance to chat in a more private and secure room. Looking at the time, I would like to for all of us to go out of this panel with a positive approach and a positive thought. So maybe we can look at possible solutions. Kathrin, you are very familiar with a multi-stakeholder approach, and also with cooperating with big companies. So in a nutshell, what do you say? What is necessary to make stakeholder engagement meaningful? I mean, you mentioned that already with the task of it being on an eye level, with having that really practical approach, but maybe you also have a tip for our tourism audience.
I think I'm repeating myself, but I strongly believe in it. Get people on board and don't just rely on reports. And this is maybe one more thing that I really have to say. What is my main concern always is, especially also with the big companies that I work with, because that is mainly what IG Metall often represents, is it's one thing to get a report that is paid for by management, and it's something else talking to the people on site. Sometimes you would assume they don't talk about the same company. And just because there are no complaints, maybe at the headquarters, wherever they may be, does not mean that there are not problems within the company or along the supply chain. That is something also coming back to that supply chain law thing. Complaint mechanisms. Be there, try to have a say, try to bring the perspective from the countries where you operate, where you have experience into the discussions, because otherwise this, there will be some kind of ways to complain. There has always been ways to complain in big companies, but I would say if there are no complaints, it's not a good sign. It's mostly the sign that people are afraid to complain. And if we go back to sub-Saharan Africa, where there's an unemployment rate of 60%, I would also ask myself twice if the problem that I have is really that big that I file a complaint at an email address that ends with the name of that company that pays my bill. So I think really, really try to have a say, get people on board, and also try to go beyond the right. Because it's one thing to have legal rights that are not that, active in many countries, but you can also use political power instead of just the legal power. And I think that's worth trying, not just sticking to the legal terms that you have.
Talking about political power, Jeny, maybe we can bring in one solution from you here, because you have been working with the local government in Nepal. I'm assuming that must have been challenging, and you also already addressed how it was necessary that, for example, a male person got there to bring in proof. So I imagine that to be difficult. I don't know if you would like to add any solutions when talking to local government. Is there anything else necessary that you would give as a tip to our audience?
Yes, actually, from the planning phase, I think through the experience of SASANE, it is important that you involve the local government from the planning, the implementation to the monitoring phase. That way, they can understand the actual cause, rather than we standing there and blabbering about the cause and giving them potential solutions, like how the local government could fit. If we involve them from the planning phase itself, they come face to face with the issues, and they are now compelled to work with us and towards a goal, a certain goal. And another thing, what we make sure we do is we encourage the survivors we have to sensitize the government by themselves. Our survivor sisters work as leaders, and they show the government or the local level people see, this is actually an issue. And you not supporting us to come forward is making our life worse. We are not able to achieve the dreams we have. We are not able to get education because there is denial in citizenship. There are a lot of issues in Nepal. If we sit and chat about it, it would be midnight, 12 o'clock. And the government is very ignorant. They don't feel like the issue of being trafficked or issue of getting married early is actually an issue. They think that it's always a fault of a girl, she's being trafficked. because she gets lured easily, being attracted to a lot of materialistic things and being influenced by friends. So it's their problem, like they should deal with it. It's not a government concern. So we make sure that the survivors themselves go and create a sensitizing environment for the local people. Like when they see through their eyes, sit and interact with the survivors, they become somewhat sensitized after it, because the girls are really small, and with a limited opportunity, they can just go and sit with a government official and talk face to face with them. It's like a huge thing. So I personally feel like they should be involved from the planning phase until the phase of monitoring, so that each and every step is happening with them, not actually after their permission, but along with them. So like they are forced to work together and see the positive changes that that particular initiative brings.
Thank you, Jeny, also for bringing in the importance of personal stories, something that we can also keep in mind for our work, telling stories of people that we met, that we engaged with. I mean, we as humans are really, really simple. So for us, it makes it way more tangible if we have a concrete story to tell and not talking about a majority of people. We are almost at the end of our symposium, or at least the panel. So for the last statement, I would bring in Laura once again. What would you say with Der Touristik being one of 3 companies at the moment in Germany who falls under the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz, the German supply chain law? Do you consider that as a positive drive for stakeholder engagement? And what tip would you give other tourism companies who might be facing falling under the law from next year on?
Yeah, so it's only 2 this year. It's only 2 in us. And next year also only a few. There is light and shadow, I would say. So it is good that there is a law now and that companies are obliged now to start this process. As I said before, we have started with human rights topics before, so it's not totally new for us. But now, of course, you have many obligations you have to follow. The tricky part really is that you have to involve your partners, but you don't want to burden them too much, right? But you do need some data and involvement from them so that you are able then to follow the law. Maybe just one example, you are obliged to do a yearly risk analysis, which is really important, I think, also for our product departments to really have a look at their products, at the partners, at the supply chain, to really know where they are involved and what kind of business that they are dealing with. In the beginning, you do an abstract risk analysis. This you do on the basis of your own data. So you look at all your partners, all your business, then you see what kind of business is it, what countries, what risks are there. And then you choose only the very high risk partners, but then the wording's already trickier. The very high risk partners already a difficult word. And then with these partners, you have to go one level further down and do a concrete risk analysis to really see what kind of measures are already in place. Do we need other measures? And this, of course, you can only do if you get data to do this concrete risk analysis. So I think it's good that we start that now, to really have a process and not do it on a basis of we do maybe impact assessment every 2 years or so. Now you really have a yearly process, and this is good. But we really have to take care that we don't burden the supply chain, our partners, too much. That's why we really like to cooperate in the industry together, to join forces, especially if it comes to the trainings. Now we're already discussing with you. We think there is more chance for cooperation, for example, for the risk analysis and so on. Because if we start now to work with 3-4 different tools and questionnaires, then our partners will be overwhelmed for sure. And maybe as a tip for the rest, get started, make yourself on the way, because it's quite a lot, to be honest. And if the European law comes, this is going to be even tougher. So use roundtables like the Roundtable here for Human Rights to get an idea what it's all about. There are some free tools, there are exchanges, so use that. And maybe also the questions you asked the other to use. I think we should never forget one of the biggest stakeholders we have, especially like middle and bigger sized companies, which are the employees, the teams. So always take all the employees on your way, inform them, and because you can have the most beautiful guidelines and awesome risk analysis, but the people who are really then dealing with these topics, they have to be informed and they have to be motivated to really also drive change. So I think this is something we have to always take into consideration.
Perfect. I think that was the perfect finishing sentence. So I would say let's give a big round of applause for our speakers here today.